Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? Admin Synergy coming to you guys here today with another deck tech. So today we're going to be taking a look at another standard deck, and it is Esper Control. So a ton of you guys have been asking for me to cover this deck, and luckily enough, pretty much every season of standard competitive, I find myself playing this deck if it's playable. So we're going to be breaking it down here today, but if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave it down in the comments below, and I'll take it into consideration for future deck techs. And be sure to check out the playlist in the description below, where I have all the previous decks that I've covered archived, so you guys can check that out and see what I've already covered. Alright, so the first thing that we're taking a look at here, as always, is going to be the land base for the deck. So it would be nice if we had all the shock lands in standard right now, but because this is right after Return to Ravnica, all we have is really Hallowed Fountain. But we're running a playset of the Hallowed Fountain. We're going to put those up there. From there we have Glacial Fortress, so we're running a playset of the Fortress as well. There we have Drowned Catacomb, so playset of that as well, providing blue or black. From there we have Isolated Chapel for white or black as a playset. Then we have Utility Lands, so we have our two Nephalia Drownyards in the deck. So this is against slower matchups where nothing's really happening. We have Nephalia Drownyard to mill out other decks like mid-range and control. Anything that's generally slow, or any situation where we have the surplus mana and we can't really do anything. At the end of our opponent's turn, we're pretty much just going to Drownyard and just get ourselves closer to being able to win the game. But obviously it's going to be bad against stuff like Reanimator and any deck that's playing off of its graveyard. But Nephalia Drownyard for any decks that their graveyard is irrelevant to their game-winning strategy. So, two Drownyards. From there we have Evolving Wilds, so I'm using two Evolving Wilds in here, and it's just to fetch basic lands. We fix a little bit, but ultimately it's thinning out the deck too, so it's good for that. And it also lets us shuffle after using Jace's -2 ability, which could be beneficial or not, but either way, it's an easy way to shuffle up the deck. And then we have our basics. So we're running 3 basic islands. We have 2 plains. And then we just have 1 single swamp. So that's the land base that we have going on for us here. Now we're going to take a look at everything else. So first off, we have Snapcaster Mage, and he's going to be a 2-of in our deck, so he's a 2/1 for 2 mana with flash, and whenever he enters the battlefield, he's going to give an instant or sorcery card in our graveyard flashback, and the flashback cost is equal to its converted mana cost and the original casting cost that we have. But Snapcaster Mage is very strong. We get to start flashing back our counter spells, our ultimate price if it becomes relevant, and anything else that we need to just get closer to solving the things that our opponent's trying to do. So 2 Snapcaster Mages. From there we have our Planeswalkers, so we have Jace, Architect of Thought. He's a 3-of in the build, 4 loyalty, 4 cost Planeswalker. His +1's pretty good. He protects himself and you as well, giving creatures -1/-0. If they attack you until your next turn. -2 is where we want to be with him. We reveal the top 3 cards of our library. Our opponent separates them into 2 piles. We keep one, the other one goes to the bottom of our library, which ties into Evolving Wilds, where we can shuffle and kind of reset things and work from there with what Jace has let us see so far from our deck. And the -8 is a bribery for both your opponent and you yourself, so you get to search your opponent's library as well as your library for any big threats, and you can play them without paying their mana cost, and it's an alternate cost. So we're running 3 Jace, Architect of Thought. He's a good utility planeswalker for us. From there we do have Sorin, Lord of Innistrad, and he's still pretty good in standard. 3 loyalty, 4 cost, 1 white, 1 black, and 2 generic. His +1's going to make a 1/1 with lifelink for us. -2, and we get an emblem where creatures we control get +1, +0, so that's going to be also fairly relevant if we're playing off of our token creation. And then the -6 is being able to destroy up to 3 target creatures and or planeswalkers, and then we get to return them from the graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So Sorin's fairly good, especially if you can get him to the ultimate. But we're running Sorin as a 3-of. Overall, he's just really good. If you can get him to that ultimate stage without him being removed or killed or something like that, he's pretty good. From there, we have Tamiyo. So we're using Tamiyo as a 2-of in the build. So 4 loyalty, 5 cost, +1, and we get to tap down a permanent, and it does an untap during its controller's next untap step. -2, we get to draw cards equal to each tapped creature target player controls. And -8, we get the emblem where we don't have a maximum hand size, and if a card would be put into our graveyard from anywhere, we get to put it into our hand instead. So 2 Tamiyos. The ultimate is really nice to have in a game. The -2 is fairly relevant. You can draw like 2 to 4 generally, depending on what you're playing against, unless you're doing it for your own creatures. But the +1 is also nice, being able to tap down your opponent's permanents, and especially after a Wrath, like if they have Thragtusk or something, you Wrath, and then Tamiyo to tap down their 3/3. From there, we have Azorious Charm. So Azorious Charm is fairly useful. It's 1 white, 1 blue, and we can either have our creatures gain lifelink, or we can draw a card, or we can put target attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library. So we are running a playset of the Azorious Charm just because it's useful all around in what it can actually do for us. It's a solution to swinging creatures, especially stuff like Thundermaw, Hellkite, and other annoying creatures that could come about that we can't necessarily deal with right away, and at least until our turn. But ultimately, it's really nice because if you're not using it to deal with creatures, you can just use it to draw cards, and it's fairly reasonable that you can Azorious Charm and then Nephalia Drownyard your opponent, so you mill them out of whatever card that you put back on top of their library. So I've done that a couple of games, and it's a nice little thing that you can do. But ultimately, Azorious Charm, regardless of any synergies, is just all around good. From there, we have Sphinx's Revelations. So we're running 2 of these, and it's we gain X amount of life, draw X amount of cards, and it's 1 generic double blue other than its X cost. So we have 2 of them in the deck, and it's just a tremendous card, especially later game when you're able to draw a whole lot, reset your hand to like 7, gain like 6 or 7 life there, and just get all of the answers that you really need. From there, we also have 1 Forbidden Alchemy. So Forbidden Alchemy is a 3 cost, and you look at the top 4 cards of your library. You get to take one of those cards, you keep it, and the other 3 go to your graveyard. And it also has a flashback for 8, or actually no, not 8, 7, 6 generic and 1 black. But either way, only 1 Forbidden Alchemy, because you don't want to use too many of them in this type of a build, because you start getting rid of a lot of your answers, especially if you have multiple good cards that you're kind of cycling through there. But 1 Forbidden Alchemy, just so we have another way to start digging a little bit more aside from stuff like Jace. So ended up just coming down to a 1 spot for it. From there, we have Dissipate. So our counters for the deck, we have 3 of them. So counter target spell, and if it's countered that way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So it's a 3 cost, double blue, a little bit intensive, but not unreasonable for this build, especially with how many outlets of blue we have in the lands. From there, we have Lingering Souls. So Lingering Souls is a 3 cost. We get to put 2 1/1s with flying onto the battlefield, and it has a flashback for 1 generic and 1 black. So we're running a play set of this, and it's good for either putting pressure on your opponent and swinging in, or using them to jump block and buy time until you can play other things like Planeswalkers and work from there. But Lingering Souls is a fairly reasonable way to win the game just outright from your opponent not being able to respond to them. And the flashback makes it pretty nice because even if they deal with them or you chomp, you can do it again and produce more tokens. From there, we have Ultimate Price. So we're running 3 Ultimate Price. I'll grab the English one here, but Ultimate Price is destroy target monocolored creature. So even though it's pretty specific with what it's going to be removing, and it's strictly worse than Doomblade or Go for the Throat, Ultimate Price is still pretty playable in Standard, and it does work against stuff like Thundermaw, Hellkite, Angel of Serenity, also Thragtusk, and then you can Wrath the next turn and not have to worry about that 3/3. There are a lot of targets that Ultimate Price can hit, and they're definitely very nice to be able to remove them for just that 2 mana. And it's easily flashback with Snapcaster Mage as well, so it makes it useful in that sense that it doesn't have a really extremely high flashback cost that you would have to put in. From there, we also have Supreme Verdict, so we're running Supreme Verdict as a playset in our deck. So destroy all creatures for 4 mana, 1 generic, double white, and 1 blue. And it also can't be countered, which is relevant if you're playing against like mid-range decks or any decks that are trying to base off of playing creatures and also having some fair amount of like counter spells and stuff like that. But for the time being, I think the only big thing is probably like USA mid-range that kind of utilizes that and especially plays off of stuff like Geist of St. Traft. So Supreme Verdict is a nice way to deal with hexproof creatures, any big stuff that you might not necessarily be able to hit or chump block or anything like that. But Verdict is definitely really good. We run Terminus in the sideboard as well if we need it for really heavy aggro. And then the last card that we have here is Detention Sphere. So being able to get rid of bigger threats, mainly Planeswalkers, because we already have the creature control to a T there. But Detention Sphere is also nice because we're able to get rid of a non-land permanent and all other copies of that permanent that have the same name. So if your opponent plays like Entreat the Angels and makes a whole bunch of tokens, we're able to Detention Sphere one of them and get rid of all of them. But ultimately, Detention Sphere is nice because we can get rid of Planeswalkers, anything that's pesky, and more so, it's going to be used for Planeswalkers because we already have our elements of board control with the Supreme Verdict's Ultimate Price. We have Snapcaster to flash it back, Dissipates. We have ways to deal with annoying creatures, especially stuff like Thragtusk. So Detention Sphere ends up being a good way to get rid of Planeswalkers, anything that's really annoying and could cause some trouble in the next coming turns. So that's the main board that we have for the deck. Now we are going to take a look at the sideboard options that we have. So we have Negate in our sideboard, and this is actually a 4 of because we can side it in against control and just have a tremendous amount of counter spells to actually counter their things. We really don't have to worry a whole lot about creatures as far as anything goes with control, possibly Geist of St. Traft, but not very many control decks are going to be running it as a 4 of. We actually do, but other builds might not. But Negate hits all of the annoying things that we need to deal with. Also against mid-range, it really starts eating away at all the things that they're able to do, especially Rakdos' Return, because that card's really annoying. But we have 4 Negates for anything that's running a lot of non-creature spells, so we're able to just outright counter them. From there, we have our Geist of St. Traft, like I mentioned. Against other control decks, it works wonders because you're able to outrace them very easily. So we're running Geist of St. Traft as a 4 of. So he's a 2/2 for 3. He has hexproof, so he can't be targeted by spot removal. So your opponent's going to have to Mizzium Mortars with the Overload or Supreme Verdict Terminus or even Bonfire to get rid of them ultimately. But Geist of St. Traft is a powerhouse to win against slower decks that don't really have a whole lot going on in the early turns. So a playset of Geist, very appropriate. We have Jace Memory Adept, so he's just a 1 of, and he's good for control and other slower decks. His 0 ability lets us mill our opponent for 10, which is why we want him. He he's a win condition on his own. From there, we also have Psychic Spiral, which may come as a shock for some people, but Psychic Spiral is pretty good. We shuffle all cards in our graveyard into our library and mill our opponent for that amount that we shuffled back in. So control against control, Psychic Spiral gets there, definitely. From there, we have Shimian Specter. So Shimian Specter is another interesting card that I think a lot of people don't really consider. But again, against control and against anything that's really slow, Shimian Specter gets there because he's a 4-drop 2/2. He is pretty vulnerable to removal, but against decks like USA Control and stuff like that, they're going to be siding out their pillars because they're not really relevant. But the Spectre is really nice because whenever he deals combat damage to a player, we get to look at their hands, we choose a non-land card from it, and we get to search their graveyard, hand, and library for all copies with the same name and remove them from play. So Shimian Specter is tremendously good against anything where you're able to take all of their copies and just leave them with pretty much nothing. He's really good against control mainly. So we have him as a 1-of in the sideboard. We also have 1 Sundering Growth, so it's a hybrid of green or white mana and doubled. So we're pretty much just going to be playing it for double white, but we get to destroy target enchantment or artifact, and we also get to populate. So the populate may or may not be relevant. If anything, we can populate a 1/1 Flying Spirit, the 1/1 black vampire with lifelink off of Sorin, or we can also populate the 4/4 with Geist of St. Traft. Like if your opponent Detention Spheres something else, you have Geist, you swing in, your 4/4s on the battlefield, you can populate and get rid of your opponent's Detention Sphere and have that 4/4 stick. But, I mean, the populate isn't always relevant. It's just the fact of having artifact and enchantment removal that's really nice to have in the sideboard. But we're only running it as a 1-of. We're not too worried about artifacts and enchantments, although sometimes the key runes and other Detention Spheres can be annoying, so we have the appropriate tech in the sideboard decided in against that. And then we just have our 3 Terminus in the sideboard as well, so this is against anything that's really aggro heavy. We're just able to get rid of all their creatures, put them on the bottom of their libraries, and not really have to worry a whole lot about them. But Terminus is good against a lot of decks, especially Reanimator, because it's not outright killing them, it's just putting them on the bottom of their library, so they don't get to reanimate them, which is nice. So 3 Terminus in the side, anything that's trying to outrace us, trying to play very aggro heavy. So yep, that is the main board and the sideboard for Esper Control. So if you guys enjoyed this deck tech, please be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering videos. The entire deck list is down below where you guys can check it out. And, well, until next time, guys, have a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.